Now we've seen how to do MySQL prep with this special function that's going to make sure that everything is in a format that's acceptable for MySQL. And that's going to relieve a lot of our headaches. But we still haven't done any kind of real form validation, custom validation, the kind of thing that only we as a developer know that we want. For example, we want to make sure that they submit something as a menu name. We don't want to get something empty back. And we want to make sure maybe that position is valid information and visible is valid. We're going to want this kind of testing to be done. So that brings us to the subject of validation. And how do we do it? Well, it's real simple. We just put in if-then statements at the beginning that are going to allow us to do validation. So let's just make an area here that just says validation. So remember that's what we're doing. And we'll go ahead and say form validation. So what we really want to do is set a test. And we want to say, for example, if not is set for menu name. Test whether it's set or not. And if it's not set, then do something. Now, not only might it not be set by the form, but there's also the possibility that it would be empty. So let's test for that as well. So we'll use our or if it is empty. And so we'll test it again. There we go. So now, if it's not set, or if it comes back empty with nothing in it, and remember, empty has some flexibility in what it will accept as being empty. So typing in a menu name that is 0 would also come back as being, yes, it's empty. So let's keep in mind what things empty will include, but we get the general idea. The field is empty. Then we need to do something, and we could have it return an error at that point. We could have it redirect, but let's go ahead instead and let's keep track of our errors. So in order to do that, let's say that we have an array called errors, and let's go ahead and initialize that up here. So we'll say errors equals, and to start out with, it'll just be an empty array because so far we don't have any errors. And then if we go through and it turns out that we do have an error, then let's add something to that error. So errors, and if we want to add it just to the end of the array, we can specify the square brackets with no name, and that'll just put it at the end of the array as the last error. And we're going to put in something that's just going to say, well, the problem with the error is the menu name. And that'll let us know. Now, we could just put in a true or false or something like that, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it what the error was. The error is the menu name. Now, I can actually test once I'm done with all my validations. And I could have a whole bunch here. I could test for position and visible. I could have other tests to see whether it's too long, perhaps. Any kind of if-then statement we can put in here, and we'll add any problems to the errors array. And then all we have to do is say if errors is not empty. We do that like this. So that'll check to see whether the array is empty. Then we'll take an action. And let's say that action then is to headers and location, and let's just make it go back to new subject because there was a problem with the form. We'll redirect back to the form and then exit. Now, I don't know about you, but we've already used headers twice, and I always find it a little hard to remember what this function does. So why don't we go ahead and give ourselves something easier to work with, something that we can use and remember whenever we want to do this redirect. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, open up my functions again. Let's just go back here to functions, and right after MySQL prep. There we go. I'm going to put in a new function, and let's call this one redirect to. And we're going to give it a location, and it's going to redirect us to that location. And the function is going to handle all of this for us so that we don't have to remember it. Now, we know how to do this. We just put in a substitution in place for location. And we can even make it a little more robust than that, and we can say if there is a location, if we've been provided one, then we'll do this step. So obviously it'll just fail if a location hasn't been provided. In fact, we can even use our default value here and say that the default for it, if we just say redirect to, will be null. And then we can say if location is not equal to null, then perform the action. So now we have something called redirect to, and I think that's going to be easier to remember. I'm going to go ahead and close functions again, and let's use our new fancy redirect to instead. Now we don't need to call exit anymore, and we don't need any of this. Now, I think that's a lot easier to work with. Redirect to newSubject.php. Forget all this headers, location stuff. We'll go straight with that. You could go ahead and do the same thing where we use it down here. I want to get back to the validation, though. We're now redirecting if the menu name is empty. Let's try that out and see if we've succeeded in doing that. So we'll switch back to Firefox, add a new subject, and this time we're not going to type in a subject name. We'll go ahead and put in a position and visible. We'll say add subject. And you'll see that we just came right back here to new subject. And it came back with no information there. It didn't give us any kind of an error message telling us what happened. There are ways that we can handle that, and we'll see those a little later on. For now, it goes ahead and it just discards those errors. So it worked. It did what we wanted. It's just not as full-featured as we might like. Now, we could have redirected it to PHP and said error equals 1, and then said there was one error with the form or something like that. But we'll come up with some better ways to handle this a little later on. For now, the overall idea I want you to notice is that we've done some checking for if something is set, and then if not, put it into an array. And then at the end, let's check that array, and based on whether it has something in it or not, allow this page to proceed. And if not, we just interrupted the page and jumped out of there. Now, obviously, if we want to do this kind of checking on a lot of different fields, let's say we're going to do the same thing again, but this time we're going to do it with position and check the same thing for position, then we're starting to get in the area where a function or a loop would help us. And I think we could actually probably use both here. So why don't you try and experiment with that and see if you can come up with a way that we could maybe have an array of all the fields that are not allowed to be empty. So we have an array that's just the names of the fields that can't be empty, and we'll loop through them, checking each one of those names to see, is it set, is it empty? And if so, we'll put that name into our errors array. You may find the for each loop to be most useful when working with this array that we've built. So go back and look at for each loops if you need to and review it, and then I'll show you my solution to it in the next movie.